Good morning everybody, and welcome back to a new video here today on the channel, where as someone that has drawn quite a few LEGO Zelda minifigures and thought up the concepts for two LEGO Zelda minifigure series, I think it's time that I gave my predictions for what I think might happen if we were to see a LEGO Legend of Zelda CMF in either summer of this year or whenever LEGO gets around to making Zelda themed sets. Now, if you remember, you watched a couple of weeks ago, I did a video talking about what I believe the most likely sets we'll see in a LEGO Zelda wave are, and I didn't mention a CMF because I don't believe that this is something we'll see initially. However, I still thought it was worth just putting it out there to see what you guys thought, and I guess just to actually share my predictions for like my official top 12 picks for what I think could appear in a CMF. So without further ado, let's find out who I think the most likely candidates for a LEGO Zelda CMF are. And just one more thing before we start is I should clarify that while my wave 1 and 2 were accurate, as in they were trying to be realistic picks for the type of character LEGO might pick, by the time we got to our Series 2 one, they were obviously influenced by who I hadn't drawn in previous custom sets, mainly because you can't just put boring figures in a CMF, they've got to be special. And the same goes true with Wave 1 for an extent. Again, we'll be following a similar principle to that one, however there are definitely some unique twists here, so I hope you will stick around to see what they are. And we have a lot of characters to choose from, and even more that I haven't drawn yet, so let's take a look, shall we? So, the first one we're going to get up to is our Link variant. I'm pretty sure that every CMF that they would ever do for The Legend of Zelda, which I believe personally would only ever be one, if any, will have to have a Link and of course a Zelda and a Ganondorf. But starting with Link, I think this one's a bit of a tricky one, because I don't believe we'd be getting the classic green Link or the classic blue Link in a CMF like this. They're two common variants. He's our main protagonist. He's going to be appearing across most of the sets in a LEGO Legend of Zelda wave. Therefore, I think we're going to be trending more towards an exclusive variant. That's not to say that they couldn't do the green outfit or the blue outfit if they were only ever intending to do a CMF, but it feels a bit like trapping yourself in a corner, a bit like what they did with the Harry Potter series. So I think we'd be much more likely to see something like the Ancient Armor, Soldier's Gear, or the magic armor from Twilight Princess. Something varied, something colourful, but something that still very much looks like Link. In fact, we could still see Zora armor, although maybe that's a bit more of a stretch. However, there have been a lot of Link outfits. We could see something like Fierce Deity, a particular Skyward Sword version, Deku Link, Goron Link, Zora Link, all the kinds of things, the Ocarina of Time style, Spirit Tracks. There are so many different styles of Links, and then even his outfits within Breath of the Wild, which you could choose from. You could just do the Flamebreaker set, or the Snowcrawl set. You could have anything as long as it's Link, so that children can get their hands on Link in a cheap way. Same goes true for Zelda. She's another part of the main name of the series and of course a central part of the Triforce. It would be very clear that she would appear in this CMF. Her variant is going to be slightly less confusing than the Link one because she's mostly not in the games, and that is something that I only really came to the realization of when I thought of what sets I can include her in. And because she can be included in less sets than Link, it means that a couple more of her variants aren't as much of a lockout because they're never going to appear anywhere else. Particularly, I think the Breath of the Wild blue research outfit, the one on the right, is the most likely because she never wears that in anywhere other than the memories in game. So if they were going to do a set even with the Dark Beast Ganon fight, it would be in the praying dress. Or if they were going to do a set based off the Calamity happening, again, it's going to be the praying dress. And the only time where they'd ever use the blue dress in a set other than a CMF would of course be in a pre-Calamity set, so an Age of Calamity set or a pre-Calamity Hyrule Castle, and even then they might use the other royal gear, so I don't believe that variant would be off the table and would be a great and really popular CMF inclusion. Twilight Princess Zelda is another option. You could always go with your more classic Zelda designs. It depends on how you want to use them in other sets, and I think if we wanted to go for a bit more of an out there variant, just like with the Link's one, I think the Snowcrawl tunic from Breath of the Wild or Age of Calamity would be a great shout as a variant that I'd love to see. Moving on to, of course, completing out our Triforce, I believe the third most likely pick for our CMF series would be Ganondorf. And Ganondorf's a bit open, really. Again, he could appear in lots of different forms in sets, but there are so many enemies in the Zelda series that I don't believe it would be too much of a bad thing if we got rid of one of the variants. I think the most interesting would probably be the Twilight Princess Ganondorf, and then he wouldn't have to appear in any other sets. However, Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time could also be some good choices, and this could also extend out to, as I said, the Ocarina of Time Time Ganondorf, Demise, and Vati, who all sort of fit this character where I feel like you're not going to include more than one of those types. So I think we'd either see Vati, Ganondorf, or Demise in this position. Or maybe dehydrated Ganondorf from Breath of the Wild 2. You know, that's always a consideration. I think the next up, the fourth pick, I have picked Marin from Link's Awakening, and the majority of this decision is made off the fact that she was in the Hyrule Warriors game. I think her inclusion over there makes it very clear to me that she is still a fan favourite over at Nintendo, and if given the chance, I reckon she would be one of the 12 spots in a CMF series. Now, just because I'm saying that Hyrule Warriors works here, it's not the main thing. Of course, Marin is from Link's Awakening, and that is where I would imagine her appearance would be designed from, not the chibi style, just as if she was a normal human, and I think she'd be a worthy inclusion in these series. She's a popular character, and of course she's a bit different as well, nice and different colour scheme. She's sort of a Zelda alternative, really, isn't it? So that's a bit awkward. But moving on. Tingle, again, following the Hyrule Warriors logic, Tingle is also a playable character over in Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. Therefore, I think it's pretty likely that he would appear in a CMF series, considering how they don't seem to care how much he's hated over here. I think the Majora's Mask appearance is definitely the more likely of the two, as the Wind Waker one wouldn't necessarily translate as well to a minifigure, although maybe you could have an alternate face showing off the other style. I think he's pretty much a lock for a CMF series. I find that really fun, and I actually put him in my CMF Series 1 as well. So definitely do think that Tingle would be appearing in a Legend of Zelda CMF. And I think next up most likely is going to be Impa as well. Particularly, I think the Ocarina of Time Impa is a lock here. However, the one I drew was my Skyward Sword one because I love Skyward Sword. And also the Age of Calamity / Breath of the Wild Impa isn't out of the question either. However, I just think for nostalgia's sake and the sake of a CMF for colour variation and all of that jazz, it will probably be the Ocarina of Time Impa that takes the cake for her position. I mean, yeah, maybe Breath of the Wild, but no, it's got to be Ocarina of Time. I think Ocarina of Time Impa is also a lock for a CMF. Next up, just to give a bit more enemy variation, I believe we would see something along the lines of a Dark Knight in a Legend of Zelda CMF. I've picked here two examples, the Black Dark Knight from Twilight Princess and the Mighty Dark Knight from Wind Waker. Personally, I believe they'd go with the Black Dark Knight from Twilight Princess. It's its most iconic appearance, and I really do think that it fits really well in a CMF style environment. Next up, we have the Old Man, and you may be thinking I mean the Old Man from Breath of the Wild, and while that is a consideration, I mostly mean the Old Man from Zelda 1. I feel like this guy would be really cool to see translated into a minifigure form. He could use a new dress piece as well as a white beard. He'd be a really simple figure, but a really great inclusion that's nostalgic, and the first time that the Old Man has appeared in 3D since the instruction manual of the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. However, of course, there is another Old Man in the Zelda universe, and of course I'm referring to King Rome Bosforama's Hyrule in his disguised form. Is that a spoiler now? It's 5 years old. And you can see here that they could either include him in his Old Man form, or maybe his accessory would be the ability to put like a cloak over his head or something, just to like transform between the two minifigures. The King would also be a great shout. I mean, if we're going to do the King, it could also be Daphnis from the Wind Waker. Either one would be great, but I think the King is a nice splash of colour and a bit of different representation for the Zelda CMF. Next up is Skull Kid / Majora, another one that's fairly hard to include in different sets due to his lack of appearance really in his game. The Majora's Mask is super iconic, which makes it the perfect fit for a CMF and the perfect thing that people want to go out and buy for that cheaper price tag. Coming with a fairy is also a really nice shout. Of course, it's going to be the purple one, and you'd include a face print underneath like I did in my other variant. I really do think he'd be in the dark orange colour now that I've thought about it for a year and a half. However, Majora's Mask is just too iconic. There is no way they would not include it in a set if they were to do a Legend of Zelda CMF. I think for the last couple of ones in our series, it's important that we get some representation for the races of Hyrule. They're some of the most interesting and wacky characters we've had across the Legend of Zelda series, and what better way to celebrate them than putting them as desirable spots inside a CMF. First up though, we'll talk about the Goron representative. Again, there's a couple of choices here. We could go for Darmani, or Goron Link, I should say. We could go for Daruk, or we could go for Daruni. A lot of D's there. Either one of these guys would be perfect for a CMF. They're iconic characters that people want to have on their shelf and buy as part of their CMF collection. I think Daruk's probably the least likely because he's the most usable in other sets, followed by Darunia, who would be really cool to see with his Sage Medallion, and he was actually included in my CMF 1 to give that representation to the Gorons, because I think that's something that LEGO would do in a real CMF. And following on from that, we also have another one of our major mainstay races with the Zora representatives, and there are so many choices for this one. You can go across almost any 3D game with it. Starting on the left, we have Macau with his fish guitar, who was my pick for the Series 1 of this series. We have Ruto from Ocarina of Time, Prince Rallis from Twilight Princess, and Mipha from Breath of the Wild, all as mainstay choices for a Zora representative in a Zelda CMF. However, there are more choices still. We have Ruto, as I mentioned, Rallis, Mipha, Macau. We could also have Lulu, which would be a bit of a strange one, but I guess it works. You could also have Sidon, and if we're talking about Mipha for a second, we could have her with a baby Sidon accessory. Wouldn't that just be cool? Like a Sidon in the baby mold, that would be fun. And then finally for this series, we'll go on to the Gerudo representatives. Again, there are a little bit less choice here because a lot of the Gerudos are either unnamed or unimportant. Therefore, our only real choices are Noboru, Riju, and Urbosa. I think if they were not going to do Daruk and Mipha, then they wouldn't do Urbosa. So I believe Noboru is our only mainstay choice. And again, she was in my Series 1. However, yeah, no, I'd say Noboru is probably the most likely out of any Gerudo to make it into a series. And that is purely because she's the only really important one besides Urbosa and Riju now. So that's interesting. Either way, that is going to do it for today's video. That was 12 picks who I believe are the most likely to see in a CMF. I have no idea if we're going to see a Legend of Zelda LEGO CMF. I mean, we could, maybe, but it seems unlikely at this point. I definitely prefer a full range of sets. However, the point is that prediction is out there now, and therefore, if it ever does come to light, then we'll know if I was right, and we'll be able to talk about it in a future video. So, let me know your top 12 picks for figures to appear in a Legend of Zelda CMF, if it ever was to happen, and what other Nintendo CMFs you would love to see in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.